let's look into the types of sentences and how these can be written. Sentence type and purpose. So as we were discussing, a sentence can come in a different variety of shapes and lengths. All sentences serve on one of only a few very basic purposes. So let's look into the types of sentences and how it can be done. So every sentence is one of the following types, and that is simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. Now, to talk about a simple sentence can be defined as a sentence that contains subject and a verb, and it might also have an object and modifiers. However, it contains only one independent clause. Say, for example, she read, she completed her literature review. He organized his sources by theme. They studied APA rules for many hours. So basically, there is just a simple sentence without too much of complications or without any multiple action words or multiple, adjectives and adverbs. So basically, in other words, a simple sentence is a sentence which has a subject and verb, or sometimes it could also have subject, verb plus object and modifiers. And the compound sentence, when you join two simple sentences properly, you get a compound sentence. A compound sentence is something that can be broken into two complete sentences, each with its own subject and its own verb. And you can join these simple sentences to create compound sentences either of two ways, either with a semicolon or with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Like it could be for, like when I say conjunctions, that's what we have discussed in the earlier session, like for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. For example, here are some examples. Homer has basic plant science on Mondays and Wednesdays. Environmental horticulture conflicted with his schedule. Homer has basic plant science on Mondays and Sundays, but environmental horticulture conflicted with his schedule. In the first example, we have clubbed the sentences by using a semicolon. And in the second example, we have clubbed the sentences using a comma. In other words, you can consider a compound sentence as a sentence which can club two sentences or a sentence or two different subjects using a conjunction or a punctuation. Yeah. Complex sentence. A complex sentence contains at least one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. So dependent clause can refer to the subject, who or which, and the sequence or time or the causal elements of the independent clause. If a sentence begins with the dependent clause, not the comma after this clause, if, on the other hand, the sentence begins with an independent clause, there is not a comma separating the two clauses. So what we're trying to say here is, with the example, we would be able to understand a little better. Although she completed her literature review, so she still needed to work on her methods section. Now, if you look at the first sentence, although she completed her literature review, that's your dependent clause. She will needed to work on her methods section, but then that's an independent clause. Now, both of these sentences are separated by a comma, which is again clubbing the two different statements. Note the comma in the sentence because it begins with a dependent clause. So what we have here is, although she completed her literature review, she still needed to work on her methods section. So primarily what we're talking is, it's a little, basically we have a dependent clause which is beginning the sentence, henceforth we ended a comma, and post which we have completed the sentence with an independent clause. So to make it much more simpler, you guys can understand or complete it like having a multiple, using dependent and independent clauses and adding multiple verbs and multiple nouns and prepositions could also create a complex sentence. So second example, because he organized his sources by theme, it was easier for his readers to follow. They studied APA rules for many hours as they were so interesting. Compound complex sentences. Sentence types can also be combined. A compound complex sentence contains at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. So, like in previous to what previous statement or previous type of sentence, what we've understood, a compound sentence is a sentence which will help to club two different sentences using a punctuation or a conjunction. And a complex sentence is something which has a dependent clause and an independent clause, or it could also have a conjunction which is connecting the complex sentences. Now, when we have a sentences which are already compound along with the dependent and independent clauses, then we could call that particular sentence as a compound complex sentence. For example, she completed her literature review, but she still needs to work on her methods section. Although he organized his sources by theme, he decided to arrange them chronologically and he carefully followed the meal plan for organization. Now, in the second sentence, you would be able to see the difference. Although he organized his sources by theme, that's a dependent clause, he decided to arrange them chronologically and he carefully followed the meal plan for the organization. Now, the second part of the sentence, post the first comma, gives you a clear understanding of two sentences which are clubbed together using a conjunction. And both of these second part sentences have a dependent and independent clauses. So primarily, in order for you to understand, a compound complex sentence is a sentence which has dependent and independent clause that can be separated using a conjunction and also separated and also can be separated using colon and semicolon to make it a compound sentence. So basically a sentence by itself, when you have these many aspects in the sentence, it would naturally become a compound complex sentence. One more example. Now let's look at the third example. With pizza and soda at hand, they studied APA rules for many hours and they decided that writing in APA made sense because it was clear, concise, and objective. Right. So that's about the sentences and sentence structure. So what I would recommend most of you would be try and use the sentences as simple as possible. Try to make the conversation using the simple and compound sentences, so than using complicated complex sentences. So most of the conversation depends on what kind of usage and how you would want to put across the information across. So what my recommendation would be, try and use the simple sentences as much as you can.